Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emily Vale. I'm the Executive Director of the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, and you are in the Stream and Buffer Protection webinar series, part 2 of 4. So this workshop has been organized by the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, along with the Hudson River Estuary Program at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and sponsored by the Hudson River Estuary Program, along with NYPIC. So thanks so much to everyone who helped put this together and also helped support with funding. If you're not familiar with the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, we're a small nonprofit that works across the Hudson River watershed to unite and empower communities to protect their local water resources. We provide education, training, and networking opportunities for watershed groups like this Watershed Roundtable pictured here. Even in this time of pandemic and being socially distant, we're still working as hard as we can to get groups together and share information and make that as accessible as possible. So today we're talking about streams and their buffers, and why are these so important? Well, we're talking here about the area where the land and the water meet, which is a really dynamic area and really important for stream health, thinking about water quality, stream habitat, stream stability, flooding, and so on. But as important as they are, protecting buffers around streams can be really challenging, and there's many opportunities and options and ways to go about stream and buffer protection. So last week we heard from Dr. Peter Groffman on the science of stream buffers. If you missed his talk, it's posted on our YouTube channel, and I'll be sending around a link to that along with the link to today's recording as well. So today we have state regulations and resources, and in the coming weeks we'll hear case studies on municipal and land trust stream buffer protection, along with other local tools to protect streams and their buffers, looking at the municipal scale. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Corbin Gosier from New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to talk about DEC's stream protection rules.
Hey everybody, can you see and hear me okay? All right, I'm going to move into sharing my screen. See if that works. So I guess, can folks see my screen here?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, looks good. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I appreciate being asked to talk about some stream protection regulations today. My plan is to focus on the regulations that I work with mostly, which is Article 15 and Part 608. There are other ways that streams are protected. There are other regulations, things I'm not really going to be covering today. You may be familiar with speedies and effluent limitations, perhaps endangered species regulations that may come into play when we're talking about stream protection. So that there is a host of things that and mechanisms that are functioning towards stream protection, but really today we'll just talk about Article 15 and Part 608, and I will get into that. Before I do, before I start talking about regulatory language and definitions and things like that, I want to just sort of start off and frame the discussion a bit and talk about streams and really what are streams. So first of all, ecologically speaking, and I really like this phrase, streams are long, linear ecosystems. Why is that important? And also, I really like that phrase. I didn't come up with it. That's from the U.S. Forest Service Stream Simulation Manual. Other stream ecology texts, I'm sure, have similar types of concepts and phrases, but I really like this one. But when we're going to be regulating, protecting streams, it's good to sort of know something about those streams. And the fact that streams are long linear ecosystems means that if there's a project or an activity that occurs along a stream, it doesn't necessarily just affect that portion of the stream or a point location, so to speak. stream projects can have impacts downstream on water quality, stream stability. They can have impacts downstream and upstream in terms of aquatic organism passage and connectivity. So I just like to have everyone keep that in mind. And also, streams aren't just isolated in that they're one. We're worried about one stream. Streams are interconnected, so we do know that smaller streams feed into larger streams and so on. And a project may have an impact within a tributary, and then that tributary flows into a larger stream. And again, some of those same issues that we were discussing a minute ago would come into play. So sorry about my cursor there. But besides being really neat ecologically, streams provide all sorts of benefits to all of us, certainly New Yorkers. I'm just going to throw up here a list of some of the benefits. This isn't everything, but we know that streams contribute to drinking water reservoirs. There's swimming and bathing. We'll talk a little bit about that in terms of regulatory language. We call things like primary and secondary contact recreation, irrigation. Well, there's a whole host of things here. So streams are really important, and they benefit us in a lot of ways. So as the state's resource agency, the DEC is here to conserve, improve, and protect New York's natural resources for the benefit and well-being of the people of the state of New York. So with all of those things and thinking about all of those things, that sort of brings us to what I'm going to talk about today, is that streams really need protecting. They require protection. One of the ways streams are protected is if we look at it, ECL Article 15, that's the Environmental Conservation Law, Article 15, also called the Water Resources Law. And there are a lot of titles within Article 15, which I want to focus on just a couple of the titles for now. One, the Statement of Policy, and really what I'm going to talk about a lot today is Title V, the Protection of Waters. I will mention, this is a stream and stream buffer presentation series. So I just want to mention that Title 27 of Article 15 describes the Wild, Scenic, and Recreational Rivers Program. Mostly that's just a mention for today. And again, I'm going to talk mostly about Title V. Within Title V, there are a lot of sections, and for the most part today, I'm going to focus on 15.05.01, which regarding protected streams, and then 05.05, the navigable waters. Okay, I've got to figure this out because I'm covering up some of my own text, so it's throwing me off a little bit here. Let me move this out of the way. Okay. So here's paragraph 1. And let me see if I have, yeah. And so this is what we're talking about here. So no person shall change, modify, or disturb the course of a channel or bed of any stream as defined, a little bit more language here, without a permit issued pursuant to subdivision 3 of this section. Okay, so disturbance of streams requires a permit. And paragraph 2, for the purposes of this section, we're going to be defining those streams as those streams with these certain water quality classifications or standards. And I will talk a little bit more about that. And then there's additional language that talks about these small ponds or lakes located within the course of the stream shall be considered part of the stream. So the classifications and standards that I've underlined here are those streams that we're going to start referring to as protected streams. And I'm going to go into the regulation a little bit and describe protected streams some more, but this is where that term and the definition we're going to use comes from. So the implementing regulations for Article 15 are found in 6 NYCRR, which is the New York Code of Rules and Regulations, Part 608, use and protection of waters. Within Part 608, there are really 5 categories that we're talking about. The first being disturbance of the better banks of a protected stream or other watercourse. So again, we'll talk more about that. There also is construction and repair of dams. That's within Part 608, docks and mooring facilities. But then as far as stream disturbance, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the excavation and placement of fill in navigable waters. And maybe we'll get to this water quality certification thing. Okay. So within those implementing regulations, Part 608, here again is a similar description as was found in the statute in that Article 15 that describes, that a permit would be required for disturbance of better banks of a protected stream. So again, there are definitions within Part 608, and the definition of a protected stream is very similar to Article 15, but I do want to point out that with these water quality classifications and those standards associated with those, that the state also, besides having streams that we know are trout streams, some we know support trout spawning. Those are TS streams. And so protected streams also include those trout spawning streams as trout streams. So again, the large letter would be the water quality classification, and then the letter along with the small letter in parentheses refers to that standard. So stream classifications. We're talking about Article 15 in Part 608, but if you want to know more about stream classification standards, you would go to the 700 series of our regulations, which is going to just define those standards, or those classifications, and in terms of what we call best usages. So for Class A, those are a water supply for drinking, but it also includes suitability for fish, shellfish, wildlife propagation and survival, as well as that primary and secondary contact recreation. Class B waters, now we're dropping the drinking water source, but these are the primary, they shall be suitable for primary and secondary contact recreation, and then as well as the fish, shellfish, wildlife propagation and survival. C streams no longer have that primary and secondary contact recreation, nor the drinking water source, but they shall be suitable for fish, shellfish, wildlife propagation and survival. We also have streams that are classified as D streams. We don't have as many of those, but, and here's the definition pulled from those regulations, the 700 series regulations. So they're suitable for fishing, but for some reason they may not be suitable for propagation. That's really what that one boils down to. Okay. So back to stream protections and stream protection regulations. Within Part 608, those implementing regulations that are describing activities that require a permit, we have these terms, bed or banks, and it's mentioned twice within this permit requirement language. So modifying or disturbing any protected stream, it's bed or banks, or removing from its bed or bank sand or gravel or other material that would require a permit. So let's talk a little bit about bed or banks. The first section within Part 608 is the definitions, and the first two definitions happen to be banks and bed. And I do plan to talk a little bit about mean high water. So the definition of bed of a stream or water course is that land area covered by water at mean high water. But for banks, and I don't know how well folks can see this on my screen, so I think I have this on the next slide. The definition of banks within Part 608 is, and focusing on this first sentence here, so that land area immediately adjacent to and which slopes towards the bed of a water course, which is necessary to maintain the integrity of the water course. So I think we all sort of know and can visualize what stream banks are. And I think that first sentence is a good one. But there are these scenarios. Well, what if? So there's additional language in the definition that gets to some streams that may have really steep slopes, streams that may have some not so steep slopes. And so it doesn't consider banks to extend more than 50 feet horizontally from the mean high water line for those lower gradient streams, those streams with slopes less than 45 degrees. Streams with slopes greater than 45 degrees, then that 50-foot horizontal maximum it is no longer the case. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. So you've got a stream. We're looking at a stream in cross-section. We've got this mean high water line that we've determined. And for some of these streams with really steep sloping banks, the bank, and here's that steep sloping bank greater than 45 degrees, we're going to consider the bank all the way up to that first definable break-in slope. And folks that are familiar with Rosgen, I like to think of like maybe Rosgen B streams especially, not to be confused with our water quality classifications, but those Rosgen stream types. You know, they tend to have steeper banks. They're more entrenched, and you know, that's sort of my example of what we're talking about with these steep streams with steep bank slopes. But lower lying areas, it may not be so obvious where the stream bank ends. And so if you do have a situation where it's less than 45 degrees, then we do have this maximum horizontal distance from mean high water of 50 feet. Okay, and we were talking about that a permit is required for these activities within protected streams as they pertain to the stream disturbance and the bed and the banks. Well, there are some exceptions, you know, one being emergency work, and there are exclusions for state agencies to not be required to obtain permits from other state agencies, so there is that. And there's also this agricultural sort of exemption that's within Part 608 that describes stream crossings and some other irrigation activities. So that's it for what I intended to talk about disturbance of protected streams, and specifically the bed and banks of protected streams. But navigable waters, there's another part within Article 15 describing those type of activities. And that's what we call excavation and fill, or excavation or fill. So if you hear of someone saying, well, that's an excavation and fill permit, this is what we're talking about pertaining to these navigable waters. And then here's this long definition within Article 15, which I won't read in its entirety. But again, if we go to those implementing regulations in Part 608, a little more concise, and hopefully I've included some underlining here. Yeah, so here's what we're talking about with this navigable waters and protection of those types of streams. So similarly, excavation or placement of fill, either directly or indirectly. Any navigable waters, and this is sort of, I think, interesting, is that you may have heard of Article 15 wetlands. Well, we have a whole other program, other regulations that pertain to wetland protections, but there are Article 15 wetlands that are those wetlands that fall within otherwise protected waters. So here's some language there. And those would be, to be considered adjacent and contiguous, they'd have to be inundated at that mean high water level. So again, back to the definitions within Part 608, the term navigable waters is defined. So, and the point of what I want to point out in this definition specifically is not so much that it's the definition of navigable waters, but it doesn't have to be large you know, the Hudson River type of thing to be navigable water. So navigable, in fact, vessels with a capacity of one or more persons, notwithstanding interruptions. And then again, I'm sort of blocking my own definition here, but not including waters that are surrounded by land. So again, going back to that original concept of streams being these long linear ecosystems, right, and not contained within necessarily one property or something like that. You know, here's some supporting language and definition. So mean high water. Again, within our regulations, within Part 608, there's a definition of mean high water. And here it is. I do like to point out there, so you can go through and look and see, you know, what that would be based on. One thing, if you want to have sort of an idea, if you're going out and looking at streams yourself and you want to know, oh, I wonder what does that mean high water? What, you know, I like this second part of the definition here, the vegetative characteristics. You know, the edges of terrestrial rooted vegetation are often a really good field indicator of where that mean high water line is. And here are some of the other ways to evaluate the location of mean high water. So all of that means that if someone were to propose an activity where one of these things would come into play, either they were going to be disturbing a protected stream or doing some sort of excavation or filling within navigable waters, there's a permit procedure. They'd have to apply for a permit with the state. And in Part 608, here are the issues that we're tasked with considering when we receive a permit application. So the environmental impact, the adequacy of design, operational and maintenance characteristics, safe commercial recreational use, the water dependent nature of use, safeguarding life and property, and our natural resource management objectives and values are included. And then there are standards within that next section within Part 608. So is the proposal reasonable and necessary? Will a proposal endanger the health, safety, or welfare of the people of the state? And we need to ensure that the proposal will not cause unreasonable, uncontrolled, unnecessary damage to the natural resources of the state. You may also have heard of, or you may be familiar with 401 water quality certifications. So there is a section within Part 608 that describes sort of that process. And what we're talking about is for projects where a federal license or permit is required, there is a state connection. Applicants are required to apply for and obtain a water quality certification from DEC, indicating that the proposed activity will not violate our water quality standards. All right, so that would be found in 608.9 if you want to learn more. And here's the language within Part 608, or within Part 608, just describing that. And so here are the things that we're considering if an applicant were to apply for a water quality certification. Usually that's done through something called a joint application, joint permit application, and you would check the box for water quality cert if it was something that was going to Army Corps, for example, for permitting. So with the Army Corps permitting, let's go with that theme for a moment here. So where a permit is required from the Army Corps of Engineers under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, these projects often are covered by one of the Corps, what they call their nationwide permits. And also, and not to speak for other agencies, but when a nationwide permit condition can't be met, it's similar to how we do things, an individual permit would be required. But back to the state's involvement and DEC's involvement, for those nationwide permits, which are for specific activities, the states are asked to provide a water quality certification. And so we have the ability to issue a statewide water quality certification for some of those nationwide permits or activities that included. saying, yes, okay, you're covered under this nationwide permit from the Army Corps that also covers our water quality concerns. Okay, you're good to go. So we have this blanket water quality certification that we provide. And what this document's going to do is it's going to reference these nationwide permits, these activities within these nationwide permits, and it's going to either authorize and grant with general conditions or provide special conditions for certain nationwide permits, or it could deny a water quality cert for certain nationwide permits. That denial doesn't mean that the activity can't proceed. It just means that the applicant would have to come to the department and apply for an individual water quality cert. So I wanted to be careful about my time, so that's all I've included. We have other things to talk about. I'm excited to listen in on the next presenter. That's all I have for now. And I think there may be some time for questions either now or at the end. But again, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to people today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Corbin. We've had a number of questions come in, and I'd like to get started with two questions that came in related to intermittent streams. So how do intermittent streams relate to the definitions related to mean high water, and how is the determination made between perennial and intermittent streams for stream protection?
Okay. So the way it goes is we have ephemeral streams, intermittent streams, and perennial streams. Intermittent streams can really be thought of as those seasonal streams. So those are streams that are going to dry out annually, seasonally. Not that a perennial stream would never dry out. That perennial streams do tend to dry out as well. So it doesn't have a lot to do with the definition. We could have intermittent streams that have a water quality classification that could potentially even be a trout stream. So what you're going to want to do if you're interested in understanding what a particular stream, what the classification and standard is, a good way is to figure that out is to look it up on something like the Environmental Resource Mapper. But I will say in the 800, so 6 NYCRR Part 800s that really talk about those water quality classifications and standards and have the maps of the streams. You can read some language in there also that's going to say if you're looking at a stream and you're not seeing a water quality classification, it's going to take on the water quality classification of the stream that it flows into. I don't know if that was incredibly helpful, but it's the best I can do.
Muted. Thank you. I think that answered the question. Can you, so here's a question about when a municipality claims their stream maintenance activities do not require a permit. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Sure. So if a municipality is claiming that their stream maintenance activities do not require a permit?
Okay. Yeah, and that could be. So yeah, the way we handle permitting, it works a little bit differently for different entities sometimes. What could happen with a municipality is they could be covered under a general permit, perhaps a regional general permit, maybe even one that pertains specifically to municipalities within a region. So really, if you want to know like how to apply for a permit, whether you need a permit, whether an entity is required to get an individual permit, you should really contact your regional office, maybe ask your regional permit administrator, someone like that. But it is common for municipalities to be covered under a general permit. They would still have conditions probably that they need to meet in order to do these maintenance activities, but they could possibly be covered under a general permit. That would be a specific situation to that region and that municipality.
Great, thank you. Can you comment on the DEC regulation of Class C streams in addition to the Class C with the trout spawning standard? There was proposed changes in policy that would include a Class C as a protected stream, and I'm happy to answer this one.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's all new, relatively new. It hasn't happened yet, so. If that does, as I understand it, the bill has passed the Assembly and Senate. But you know, I don't. If that happens, again, that's going to relate back to what I was talking about earlier with the definition of protected streams, and then those C streams without that T standard would then get those similar protections for in terms of disturbance of better banks.
Great. And I see there's actually a follow-up question here about an unmapped stream taking the classification of the stream it flows into, but is there a criteria of flow, I don't know how to pronounce this word, periodicity, to determine the classification? Are all intermittent or ephemeral streams so classified?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is not necessarily. Well, I would have to go and look at that, the specific terminology within part 800, and it's at the beginning. So before you get into a watershed, which is going to describe the classifications of individual streams, there's going to be some language ahead of that, and that's what I recommend that the person asking the question goes back and looks, and I could do a follow-up. I'd rather not say without reading, you know, exactly what that says and how that's described. But again, it would be in 800 point something.
Great, thank you. Last question for now, and we'll have more time at the end for questions with both Corbin and Beth. But the question is, does the DEC regulate stream crossings? For example, a landowner has property on both sides of a stream. Can the landowner lay a pair of steel beams over the stream, put wooden planks on it, and use it as an overpass? No soil, bed, or bank disturbance is done.
Yeah, so that's really getting into some specifics of a specific project. I mean, we certainly do consider stream crossings as bed and bank disturbance when they do disturb the bed and banks. Is it possible to install a bridge or a crossing in such a way where the bed and banks aren't disturbed? You know, perhaps on a case-by-case basis, you know, depending on whether or not that was a jurisdictional stream, one of those protected streams, navigable streams, you know, it may be. There's too many variables there, but I think, you know, probably the landowner, just because they own the property doesn't mean that there's not a jurisdictional stream flowing through their property. So that doesn't mean that they can do, you know, sort of any activity without applying for a permit. So again, sort of that's a specific situation, and yeah, you know, you may want to, if that is happening, you may want to just consult with the region, and you know, for the specific location or the action.
Is that something, if more people have sort of site-specific questions, they would call their regional permit office?
Yeah, you could start there, regional permits or regional ecosystem health staff. Yeah, go to the website and figure out what region you're in and look at the number. You know, I will say there's a lot of information can be gained, and I think in this next presentation we're about to see, we do have the environmental resource mappers, which I think is really helpful for like an initial look at things. So maybe even before you call, you may want to just do a little bit of research on that location yourself. And then you can also go, our website does a really good job, I think, of describing even some of the things I talked about today, describing them in really plain language, understandable, you know, do I need a permit for this activity type of thing? And you can always look at the DEC website. But yeah, if you really specific questions, you see something going on, that would be a good thing, maybe call your regional office.
Great, thank you so much, Corbin, for presenting. And next up, we will have Beth Roessler from the DEC Hudson River Estuary Program.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? All right, there we go. Okay, got to get myself set up. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Roessler I'm the Stream Buffer Coordinator for the Hudson River Estuary Program, which is a coordinated effort between, or my position is a coordinated effort between the Department of Environmental Conservation and the New York State Water Resources Institute at Cornell. And I'm going to talk about stream buffer protection resources. So this is kind of the chance to go beyond what you know, so the state protects what the state protects, but then what if you want to go beyond that? You want to think about doing more. And so there's some information about how you can do that. And I think that Peter Grothman at our last webinar talked about a lot about the fact that when you want to think about the functions that you get out of a buffer, you really need to think about, you want to think about the goal, to think about what kinds of protection you need to do and how wide of a buffer and stuff like that. So I think it's important when you start looking into all of this to make sure that you're thinking about that when you think about which resources might be useful to you. But I'm going to look at this from the point of view of thinking like, okay, I just want to dig in and learn a little bit more. So I'm going to assess what I have. And then I'm going to think about planning for protection for some particular goal and prioritize the areas that I want to protect. And then I'm going to implement that protection maybe by some funding. And so I'm going to talk about mapping tools, a little bit about site assessment tools, planning and prioritization tools, and implementation funding. And then if this is all really overwhelming, who can help? Oh, and I forgot to say, I have a lot of resources that I'm going to talk about, and almost all of them have internet links. And I'm not going to put them on the screen because it's not something that you can click on. But I am going to share with Emily a PDF of all of this with links on each one of the things that's noted. So you don't need to scribble like mad. You can if you want. But I will make sure, and she's going to be sending that out with the follow-up probably in an email tomorrow or the next day. Okay, so I think existing data, I'm going to talk about online mapping tools. I'm not going to get into GIS layers. If you're someone who has, ArcGIS and wants to do some of that harder core stuff, this doesn't go into that. But this is all the stuff that you can just click on using the internet and get all this data. So you don't have to be, a really sophisticated user. And I want to say that these mapping tools, especially these state tools that I'm going to talk about and the federal tools, they're almost all of the current data that we have that's shareable is really up on these. So or spatial data, that is. And so these are going to be some of the places we're going to find everything. And I'm going to talk about a lot of the data as it comes out of the mappers. So these first four I'm going to do some more detailed talking about those. So I'm going to mention the last three first. The environmental resource mapper, Corbin mentioned that, and I'm sorry that I didn't give you a screenshot of that, but that's really the one that you're going to want to go to if you want to ask the question, do I need a permit? It's, it'll tell you if you have A or B or C or D stream and whether it's trout and things like that. And so that's going to be the one that was designed for that. And I didn't do a screenshot, but I will give you the link for that. And I wanted to mention that a lot of the counties have their own mapping platforms, and they can be really powerful, and they may have data that's at a higher resolution than what we can give you throughout the state. And so it's really worth looking into what your county has for their GIS platform or their mapping platform. And I also just wanted to mention, like, aerial photos. We all use Bing Maps and Google Maps or Yahoo Maps, whatever thing that you use. Even that is a useful tool to sort of see where you have buffers. Oh, and sorry, off to the right, I forgot to tell you it was coming. There's a little red circle. That's just on there so you can see, that's the area that I'm going to use, I'm going to show in all of the mapping tools. And that just happens to be New Paltz, where our office is. Okay, so the Hudson Valley Natural Resource Mapper. This is a really powerful tool. It was designed to help support natural resource inventories for municipalities or counties. And so it's really like all the little things that you need to think about natural resources are on here. And so I've zoomed in on the stream layers, and all right, I'm gonna get my laser pointer out. So here you can see this is the Wallkill River, and this is a smaller stream, the Sawmill Brook. And so first of all, I have open the priority water bodies list. So this is the information where DEC puts together the data to find out, is that stream impaired based on the best use, that ABC water classification. So, and there's a lot of great data. If you click on this, and I'm not gonna do it because this isn't live, if you click on that, it will connect you to a lot more data. The other thing I have showing this dark blue is the FEMA floodplains along with this hashed area. So you can see that that's a really good thing to think about when you're thinking about, you know, buffers. If you're thinking about flooding and you're concerned about flooding, that's a good buffer to look at. And then this is this light blue is this riparian buffer. It's a riparian buffer area, as it's called. It comes from another study. And it's just a great way to look at, especially some of those smaller streams that don't have mapped FEMA floodplains. It's like, what is the area that's most likely to be contributing to the streams? This is a good thing to think about, like maybe I ought to pull back some of this heavy usage farther back out of that buffer if possible. So the DECinfo Locator is another one that has lots of great data, but it tends to be more of this permit related or requirements of the DEC. So you can see here, this is an environmental remediation area. This is a dam. This is a biomonitoring site. And each one of these, again, if you click on it, it will give you links to more sites. And so there's all this information. So if you're looking for permits that are already out there, that already exist, this is a great place. And so you don't have to call the office to get that information. You can get it straight off of the web and sort of see what kinds of things are in your community and near your stream. Stream stats. I think in the last webinar, last week's webinar, someone asked Peter Groffman about stream layers. And you know, there's all these different stream layers, and the different stream mapping platforms will get you different ones. This one I think is really interesting. So stream stats come from USGS, and they use just the elevation data to sort of create these streams. So they might not be exactly accurate at what's on the ground, but they really help you think about where water is going to flow. And so I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot more little streams on this one than were mapped on the other places. And so this is a great way to think about, and those aren't necessarily on the ground, they haven't been field checked, but if you want to go look for an ephemeral stream and find out where it might be, this is a place where water is likely to flow. And I'm going to, and the other thing you can do is you can create a watershed. You can delineate a watershed. So there's a button over here. If you press this button and you choose your spot, so let's say I had a project right here in Southside Loop. Oh, yeah, I have that too. And it will delineate a watershed for us. So it tells us the area, and it's an approximate. It's certainly not going to be perfect. You can't go out there and drop the water on the ground and be sure, but it gives you a sense of where that watershed is going to be. And in this case, it will also give you statistics about it. And so, for instance, this one, it'll tell me this is about 1/3 of a square mile, the size of this watershed. And you can kind of see where it is. So if I were seeing some concern in the stream here, I might look to the watershed for clues, or if I was going to do a project. Okay. The Riparian Opportunities Assessment, sometimes called the statewide Riparian Opportunities Assessment or the New York. So this tool was specifically created to support the identification of priority areas for buffer restoration and protection. And so the New York Natural Heritage Area put together information from about 19 different indicators looking at both ecological health indicators like canopy cover or fish abundance, and ecological stress indicators like impervious surface cover. And they created these scores. And right now you're seeing that displayed by sub-watershed. And you can zoom in and get more information. And within each, so I should say sub-watersheds, for those who are savvy, are the Hydrologic Unit Code 12, so the HUC 12s. And then within that, there's even smaller categories, which are catchments within those HUC 12s. And I've zoomed back into to New Paltz, to that Sawmill Brook. It's a little hard to see, but this is the same thing. And it's given this comprehensive score that takes in all those different indicators. And this particular one is not scoring very well in its sub-watershed. It's in the lowest percentile. And if you click on that, you get even more information about what goes into that score. And you can see here, I hovered over it and I got the canopy cover is a little bit below average And so some of these, that might be something that's adding into to why the score is a little bit lower. And you can look at, and this is just one piece of it, you can look at all of the different indicators separately and how they compare to each other. And what we found is this is a great tool for thinking about a regional kind of planning, and maybe for getting some ideas about what to think about locally, but it's not going to get you down to a site scale. And I just mentioned the, online mappers with aerial photos. And here I was looking for buffers. And so I found some around some streams. Some of them are a little more hidden than others. And the color sort of indicates whether I thought it was a higher quality or larger buffer or a smaller one. And just quickly, and I think anyone who works with a lot of maps knows that there's, the layers were created at different scales and they were created for different purposes. You see this map here on the side, which is, I think, 3 or 4 different ways to map streams that all came out with very different results. And so they can have errors and omissions, and not all streams are mapped. It's really not something that's probably possible all the time, and sometimes they're even moving. So Corbin mentioned, like, if you're really questioning whether it's a stream that would need a permit, and you have a project in mind and you're going to go forward with it, it really makes sense to contact the permit agency and be sure. Even maps have mistakes. And for local decisions, there's really no replacement for getting out and seeing the site. So, talking about getting out and seeing the site, there was lots of assessment guides out there for buffers. There's a few that I kind of like because they're sort of checklists, kind of like this one here that's on the side. And when I send the PDF, it has links to links to a couple of different assessment. But I think it's worth, if you want to go out and find out, what am I protecting and is it in good shape, or do we need to do something to make sure that that forest continues to grow because of deer concerns or something else like that. And then there's also longer longer assessments, like a whole stream corridor assessment, which includes the buffer, but also talks about lots of in-stream things. And I'm just going to mention invasive species. We created a guide to managing invasive plants in riparian areas, and it kind of steps you through all the process of thinking about whether it's a concern and which species would be worth doing control over. But also the Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, these PRISM programs have, they're regional and they can help you with some of that. And so I also wanted to remind you that you should also, for existing data, it's possible that you can find some local documentation, either from the municipality or the county or watershed groups. So watershed plans, watershed assessment, flood studies, natural resource inventories would be coming from your county or from your municipality, open space plans. Any kind of existing local watercourse protection ordinances might give you some information or maps about stuff. And then historical documents. And so especially if you want to find out like where streams have been moved or how things have been buried, looking through those documents, those old maps, those old letters, those things like that will be very useful. And I think it's really important that if you want to do protection, you think about the bigger picture, right? So if you want to protect that place in your backyard that's next to the stream, you might have to actually think about protecting everything that drains into it a little bit. So you might not have full control over that because they're these linear systems, right? So watershed planning through a watershed characterization, which is kind of taking together all of the data that you have currently available and putting it all in one place, or watershed planning, which is taking that data and then adding an element of the goals of the community and the priority projects and stuff like that. And there's great resources from the Department of State and the DEC in relation to that. And the 9-element plan is more focused on water quality concerns, but both are really, really good. And the Department of State guidebook really will step you through each one of the steps. But also if you have a natural resource inventory and open space plan, that's a way to make that same kind of planning on a municipal scale. And often those will consider the bigger watershed, but then focus in on the priorities of the community. So I am not going to go into a lot of detail on municipal protection tools because we have 2 more webinars, and I know that Emily Svensson is going to cover a lot of this in our last one. But I just wanted to mention this model local laws to increase resilience from the Department of State. It's, you know, it's a great way to sort of think about what your local community has the power to protect through local laws, or creating environmental areas. And just thinking about how you can consider streams in your environmental reviews. The resources are there, but you can take that extra step and make sure that they're considered in every project that comes forward locally. And I put conservation easements in there, not because they're necessarily municipal. They could also be land trusts, or they could be regional. But I know that the New York City Department of Environmental Protection and also the Upper Susquehanna Coalition have been working with DEC to think about how they can put together conservation easements specifically focused on buffers, but also buffers can be specifically included in conservation easements to sort of put that land out of, you know, like to take the development off the land in perpetuity. So state funding for restoration and protection. I put this on here just to sort of give you an overview, but I'm going to go into some details for each of those. And there is a brochure. That picture there is a brochure that's available on the DEC that goes through all of this. So let's go. Oh, yep. And I put in an extra slide on agricultural funding. I am not the expert on this, so I really encourage you to go to these links, or talk to your soil and water conservation districts, who are really the experts on figuring out the sort of complicated system of funding for agriculture. But there is state funding for technical and financial assistance, which includes things, buffers for preventing water pollution. I think some of us have heard of CREP, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. That's financial. Debt for Nature is a loan cancellation. And EQIP, Environmental Quality Improvement Program, they have both financial and technical assistance, and that covers farmlands and also forest lands. And I meant to say this before I launched into the funding. You know, there's funding. A lot of this is really related to restoration, and I've been more focused on protection, but I think there's a lot of overlap, so I'm putting them in anyway. So GIGP, you can establish or restore floodplains, riparian buffers, streams, or wetlands, and they've had examples of floodplain restoration, tree plantings along water, wetland reconstruction, and brownfield development. Climate smart communities, so people think about it as a way to get a certification and say, you know, like I've done a lot of these actions that are mitigation or adaptation for climate change, but there's also some funding behind it. So if you want to do some of these projects that are listed under climate smart communities, you can. And the actions related to buffers, restoration of floodplain and riparian buffer, which includes a planning aspect to it, so prioritization and planning, preserving natural areas through zoning, natural resource inventory, watershed assessment, which is the watershed planning one, it's a strange name, conservation of natural habitats. So again, all of these, and they also have a whole toolkit that sort of helps you to figure out how to perform these actions. So that's another place to look, and they'll connect you to a lot of resources. WQIP, the Water Quality Improvement Program. So under non-point source, there's a stream bank stabilization and restoration, which includes riparian buffers. And there's also land acquisition for source water protection. And that really is looking at buffers specifically. So easements or acquisition on the streams or along the reservoirs. And there's also an aquatic connectivity category, which Corbin knows more about, but you know, looking at culverts and dams that are impeding connectivity among the stream. The Hudson River Estuary Program has grants if you're in our focus area. And these are some of the grants that we've had in the past. There's no current grant round open, but we're hoping that we will have more. I put the Wallkill Watershed Almanac on there because we helped them with some of their planning and organizing through one of our grants. Trees for Tribs, last but not least, This is a revegetation program, and I run this program for the Hudson Estuary. So we provide free trees and shrubs for planting along the stream, and we also have technical assistance to help support that. And we ask our applicants to provide labor and maintenance. This is really more of a restoration, but I had to put it in. Okay, so I'm almost done. Few more pages here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. This is something that when you get the PDF, you should look into it. All of these sites have great resources, links. So if you didn't get enough from me, these have their own set of links. So each of them probably has 20 or so links on it. So if you want to dig deeper, and some of these they're organized in different ways, so worth looking into. But if you want technical assistance, I think I've mentioned, you know, the DEC, especially the Hudson River Estuary Program, we have trainings, grants, or you could call to ask about permits. The Department of State has planning assistance and grants. The Hudson River Watershed Alliance, Emily here, they have trainings and resources, and now some great videos up about, you know, all these webinars that have gone forward. Soil and water conservation districts, really for those agricultural projects, they're going to be the ones to help you figure out which avenue to take. Stream dynamics, they definitely have plant sales and know about natives. Cornell Cooperative Extension has resilience planning, plant ID resources, and those prisms that focus on invasive species. So you're not alone. There's lots of people to help with things. And I wanted to mention, okay, so happy people. There's lots of other local partners, and I think it's worth sort of figuring out who might want to help you if you're trying to protect those streams. And, you know, I think we tend to not think about all the different user groups, residents, but also local colleges, conservation organizations, Trout Unlimited, River Keepers on here in this picture, county government have agencies that support those things. So, and watershed groups for sure, that's what they're set up for. And so all of these kinds of groups would help you to sort of think about this. And some of you may already be in those places, but you don't have to go it alone. And the last resource I'll give you is my email address. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen in just a minute and ask Emily if she wants to ask some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Beth. And just a reminder that we will be sharing a PDF version of this presentation with all of the links to all the various resources. So you'll have that hopefully in your inboxes tomorrow, along with a recording of this webinar, assuming all goes according to plan. So I think we just have time for one question and one cat to show up. Well, I'll just ask it. It's a good one. Are there examples of municipalities that use existing mapping data for land use regulations? For example, a riparian buffer zoning overlay district that restricts development in the buffer area. Is existing mapping at a sufficient level of precision to approve or deny a building permit, or are municipalities doing enhanced mapping or putting that back on the person making the development application? And knowing that we have a couple more presentations on municipalities, but focusing in on that mapping, I think.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm not the expert on that. However, I definitely have heard of local regulations or local laws that have used USGS streams, or, you know, these map streams that are available and are being used in other ways, like by the state as a regulatory. I think if it, you know, if they know there's a source of it and they know that it's being moderated, I think that that is fair game. But you do definitely, to do those municipal ordinances, you probably need to have well-defined streams. And I think Emily Svensson will definitely talk about that.
Great. So I think we'll close on that note with a good cliffhanger for some of our future conversations related to the role of municipal governments and land trusts to protect stream buffers, along with tools that municipalities can use to protect buffers. So thank you so much to Corbin and Beth for presenting today. We'll have a video of this presentation up on our YouTube channel. I'll be sending a link out to everyone hopefully tomorrow. And if you haven't signed up for the rest of the series and you're interested in doing so, a link to do that will go out tomorrow as well. So thanks so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week.